The ribbons in their hair were perfectly tied. That was the detail Soviet soldiers remembered when they stepped into the Vor bunker on May 3rd, 1945. 6 children lay tucked into their narrow beds as if peacefully asleep. White nightgowns arranged with care, small hands folded on their chests. No cries for help, no signs of struggle, only stillness. The bluish tint of cyanide poisoning told the truth. In the final hours of Hitler's collapsing Reich, these children had become its last victims. Their mother had poisoned them. Their father had approved it. And history would struggle for decades to understand how parental love could be twisted into something so monstrous. Helga Susanna was born on the 1st of September 1932, the first child of Joseph and Magda Goebbels. By the time she learned to walk, Joseph had already risen within the Nazi Party, becoming propaganda minister in 1933. Cameras adored Helga. Hitler did too. Newsreels showed her presenting flowers to him on his birthday in 1936, a choreographed image of Aryan innocence. Hilda followed in 1934, quieter, dreamy-eyed, often described by her father as a little mouse. Their only brother Helmut arrived in 1935, a boy with boundless energy, dental braces, and a habit of making adults laugh. Next came Holdine, called Holdy, born in 1937, whose name stuck after the attending doctor exclaimed at her beauty the moment she entered the world. Hedwig, or Hedda, came in 1938, bright and spirited, smitten by an SS adjutant with a glass eye, telling everyone she would marry him one day. And in May 1940, the last child arrived. Heidrun, called Heidi, small and delicate, born on her father's birthday, and presented to the public as proof of her parents' reconciliation after Joseph's very public affair with Czech actress Lida Barova. The children grew up in privilege unimaginable to most Germans. Their villa on Schwanenwerder, a wealthy island in Berlin's Wannsee district, held manicured lawns and lakeside sailboats. The family's home at Lanki became a summer escape where the children swam, picnicked, and played under the watchful eye of governesses. Tutors ensured excellent grades. Seamstresses dressed them in matching outfits for newsreels. They lived wrapped in luxury, protected from the bombs that later fell across Germany, and displayed as the model Nazi family proof, Joseph claimed that National Socialism created healthy, happy children. But the reality beneath the propaganda was far more fragile. Joseph Goebbels was a chronic philanderer, conducting affairs throughout his marriage. The scandal with Barova nearly ended the marriage, pushing Magda to appeal directly to Hitler for a divorce. Hitler refused. Divorce would undermine the image of the perfect Nazi family, and so Joseph returned home. Magda, outwardly loyal, resumed her public role as the Reich's model mother. But tension simmered behind the walls of their homes. The children felt it in ways only children can: quiet arguments behind shut doors, long stretches when their father was absent, their mother's brittle smiles during public appearances. By 1944, even their insulated world began to collapse. Allied bombing raids turned Berlin into a firestorm. The Goebbels family evacuated repeatedly, fleeing from one safe house to another as the Eastern Front crept ever closer. Still, Joseph and Magda remained unwavering in their devotion to Hitler. And when Hitler retreated to his underground bunker in April 1945, Magda made a choice that sealed all their fates. On April 22nd, she brought all 6 of her children, ages 4 to 12, into the concrete shelter beneath the Reich Chancellery. The children had no understanding of what this meant. For them, the bunker was frightening, but also strangely exciting. Dim corridors, constant footsteps, urgent whispers, and adults who tried their best to smile. A nurse, Erna Flegel, later described them as absolutely delightful and remarkably calm for children trapped inside a dying regime. They played with Hitler's dog Blondie, sang songs, and chased one another through the halls. Hitler's secretary Traudl Junge remembered them as sweet, polite, and blissfully unaware that their parents had already decided they would never leave the bunker alive. On April 30th, Junge was with the children when the muffled gunshot echoed through the concrete rooms. Hitler had killed himself at around 3:30 p.m. The children startled at the noise, but adults reassured them it was only distant shelling. They accepted that explanation with the trust only children possess and continued playing. But for Magda Goebbels, that gunshot signaled the final step in her plan. Witnesses later revealed she had already told several people that she would not allow her children to grow up in a world without National Socialism. She insisted the world that would follow Hitler's death was not worth living in. Offers to smuggle the children to safety, some from people risking their own lives, were rejected again and again. Magda called her decision mercy. She believed God would forgive her. She believed her children were too pure for the world to come. By the evening of April 30th, with Hitler dead and Soviet forces closing in, the children's fate was sealed. The hours after Hitler's suicide unfolded in a haze of fear, exhaustion, and fatalism in the bunker. While many occupants prepared to flee through the devastated streets of Berlin in hopes of reaching Western Allied lines, the Goebbels family stayed in their cramped room in the Vor bunker. The 6 children, unaware of the decisions being made around them, tried to fall asleep to the constant rumble of artillery outside. Adults whispered in corners, footsteps echoed along the reinforced hallways, and every noise felt like the end pressing closer. Yet inside that room, Magda Goebbels sat with an expression of tragic determination. She had made her choice, long before arriving in the bunker. The collapse of the Reich meant the collapse of her identity, her purpose, her faith. To her, a world without Hitler was a world plunged into moral and spiritual darkness, a world where her children would live carrying the shame of being the offspring of a man history would condemn. And so she began arranging their deaths with chilling clarity. Witnesses later recounted how, sometime during the afternoon and early evening of May 1st, Magda approached SS Dr. Helmut Kunz, a dentist assigned to the bunker's medical room. She asked for help killing her children. Kunz testified years later that he refused, at least at first, telling her he could not bring himself to do such a thing. Magda did not argue. Instead, she invoked the one command that still carried weight in that suffocating underground world. She told him it was Hitler's final wish. Whether she believed this or said it merely to break his resistance remains unknown. But Kunz eventually agreed, though he insisted he would only sedate the children with morphine, not administer the cyanide. The children were told they needed medicine because they would be staying in the bunker for a long time. They trusted their mother. They trusted the adults. One by one, Kunz injected them with morphine to render them unconscious. Some accounts say the children cried afterward, frightened by the needle, but drifted slowly into sleep as the drug spread through their veins. The sedative ensured they would feel nothing when the final poison was administered. That task fell to Dr. Ludwig Stumpfegger, Hitler's personal physician, who had remained in the bunker after the regime imploded. The exact method varies across testimonies, but several witnesses, including the bunker's telephone operator, Rokas Misch, reported that Stumpfegger gave the children something sweet, perhaps chocolate, perhaps juice laced with cyanide. Another possibility is that he crushed cyanide capsules between their teeth after they had fallen deeply asleep. Regardless of the precise method, the outcome was the same. A few minutes after receiving the poison, their small bodies began to seize internally, cells starving for oxygen as the chemical shut down vital functions. It was a painless death only in the sense that the sedatives kept them unconscious, the poison still ravaged them from the inside. Magda stayed with them until it was done. What happened next was documented by several bunker survivors. Magda walked back down the stairs into the lower level, her face drained of color, her eyes swollen and red. She sat at a table where she had once played cards to pass the endless bunker hours. Now she shuffled the deck mechanically, placing cards on the table as if clinging to a last fragile thread of normalcy. Rokas Misch watched her in silence, unable to speak. For all her loyalty to Hitler and the regime, she was still a mother who had just killed her children. The weight of that truth pressed into every rigid line of her posture. Joseph Goebbels approached her quietly. No witness recalled him showing anger or hesitation. This was, after all, the man who had written in Hitler's last will that his children would support the decision to die if they were old enough to speak. He had approved their deaths, rationalizing them as an act of ideological purity. Now he comforted his wife not as a grieving father, but as a follower who had fulfilled his leader's imagined wishes. Around 8:30 p.m., the couple walked up the concrete staircase leading from the bunker to the destroyed Garden of the Reich Chancellery. Their final steps were seen by several bunker personnel who obeyed orders not to follow. What happened next remains partially uncertain. Some accounts say each bit a cyanide capsule, and then SS Adjutant Günther Schwegermann shot them to ensure death. Others suggest they asked Schwegermann to shoot them without cyanide. Regardless of the method, both were dead within moments. Their bodies were doused in petrol and partially burned, though the flames did not consume them completely. Unlike Hitler and Eva Braun, whose corpses were thoroughly incinerated, Joseph and Magda remained identifiable. The next morning, silence settled over the ruins of Berlin. Soviet forces pushed deeper into the city, block by block, building by building. On May 2nd, the Reich Chancellery fell, and on May 3rd, soldiers exploring the underground complex entered the children's room. Inside, they found the 6 small bodies lying neatly in their beds, ribbons still tied in their hair, faces calm. The scene was haunting not because of violence, but because of the extreme care taken to stage it. It was as if Magda wanted the world to see her children not as casualties, but as offerings her final expression of loyalty to a dead ideology. The Soviet soldiers who entered the Vorbunker that morning were hardened men, veterans of years of brutal combat on the Eastern Front. They had seen mass graves, death camps, entire villages destroyed. Yet the sight of 6 children laid out in perfect stillness stopped them cold. Lieutenant Colonel Ivan Klimenko, one of the first to enter the room, recalled an eerie quiet. The white nightgowns looked freshly pressed. The children's hair had been brushed and tied with ribbons. Their heads rested gently on pillows, their hands neatly arranged. No blood, no panic, no sign of struggle. Only a faint trace of cyanide's telltale discoloration marking their lips. It was a scene staged not in chaos, but with ritualistic care. A mother's hand had arranged them. A mother's decision had murdered them. The Soviet officers summoned 2 German prisoners, Vice Admiral Hans Voss and radio commentator Hans Fritzsche, both captured in the Chancellery. They were asked to identify the children. The men confirmed their identities: Helga, Hilda, Helmut, Hulda, Hedda, and Heidi Goebbels, ages 12 to 4. They were carried out of the bunker one by one, wrapped in sheets. Later, autopsies performed at the Buch Institute confirmed cyanide as the cause of death. Their small bodies bore no other injuries. They had died in their sleep, unaware of their fate, unaware their parents had chosen death for them. The remains of Joseph and Magda Goebbels were found in the garden outside, recognizable despite the incomplete burning. They were placed alongside the bodies of their children, Hitler's dog Blondie, and several other high-ranking Nazi officials in an unmarked grave. But that would not be their final resting place. The Soviet authorities feared these graves could become shrines for future Nazi sympathizers, so the bodies were moved repeatedly in the years that followed, hidden in remote locations, dug up again and again, like cursed relics of a regime the world wished to forget. The story of the Goebbels children might have ended there, lost beneath the rubble of Berlin, had it not been for the testimonies of those who survived the bunker. Some carried guilt for the rest of their lives. Traudl Junge spoke decades later of her regret how she had played with the children, laughed with them, told them stories, and never realized Magda intended to kill them. She said she had sensed a horrible tension in Magda that final day, but she dismissed it as exhaustion. Only after the war did she understand the weight of what she had witnessed. Erna Flegel, the bunker nurse, was haunted by Magda's cold resolve. Flegel had pleaded with her to save the children, to consider letting someone secretly take them out. But Magda refused, insisting no one had the right to question her decision. She told Flegel her children were too good for the world that was coming, too pure for a post-Nazi future she believed would be filled with hatred, humiliation, and judgment. She insisted she was sparing them, but perhaps the most poignant witness was a teenage nurse's aide named Johanna Ruf. Just one day before the children's murder, she had slapped Helmut Goebbels across the face when he behaved rudely while she tended a wounded soldier. She did not know who he was, only that he had annoyed her at a moment of intense stress. Later, when she realized she had struck the propaganda minister's son, she panicked, fearing severe punishment. Within hours, Hitler would be dead, and by the next day, the boy she had reprimanded was gone. Ruf lived until 2023. She wrote a memoir titled A Slap for the Goebbels Boy, still troubled by the memory of an ordinary moment that became extraordinary only because history intervened. One person tied to the family survived simply because he was not there. Harold Quandt, Magda Goebbels' son from her first marriage. Born in 1921, he was Magda's only child to live into adulthood. During the final days of the war, he was a prisoner of war, held by Allied forces. Letters Magda wrote to him from the bunker reveal heartbreaking contradictions. She urged him to remain strong, expressed pride in him, and wrote with an almost serene acceptance of her fate. But she never mentioned her plan to kill her 6 younger children. Harold had no warning. When he learned what had happened, he withdrew into silence. He never publicly discussed his mother's actions. He went on to build a successful industrial empire, dying in a plane crash in 1967. His descendants, some of the wealthiest people in Germany today, maintain a distance from the Goebbels legacy, rarely speaking of the 6 murdered children who would have been their aunts and uncle. As the decades passed, the question of how to remember the Goebbels children grew more complicated. They were innocent. They were victims. Yet they were also the children of one of history's most notorious criminals. Should they be mourned? Should they be memorialized? In 2005, Rokas Misch, the bunker's surviving telephone operator and the last person to see the children alive, called for a plaque to honor them. He argued they should not be punished for their father's crimes. Germany rejected the idea. The debate became a mirror reflecting the unresolved trauma of the past, whether innocence can be acknowledged even when wrapped in the shadow of immense evil. In the years following the war, historians and psychologists tried to understand the deeper meaning behind the children's deaths. To many, Magda Goebbels became the ultimate symbol of ideological corruption, a mother who inverted the most fundamental human instinct. Maternal love, a force that normally shields children from danger, had been twisted into a justification for murder. She did not kill them out of hatred or vengeance. She killed them because she believed it was her duty. She wrote a memoir titled A Slap for the Goebbels Boy, still troubled by the memory of an ordinary moment that became extraordinary only because history intervened. One person tied to the family survived simply because he was not there. Harold Quandt, Magda Goebbels' son from her first marriage. Born in 1921, he was Magda's only child to live into adulthood. During the final days of the war, he was a prisoner of war, held by Allied forces. Magda Goebbels herself had been held up as the ideal German mother, raising 6 perfect Aryan children before the eyes of an adoring nation. Photographs of her walking with her children appeared in magazines. Newsreels showcased the family as proof that Nazism brought joy and prosperity. And yet, when the ideology collapsed, when the promised 1,000-year Reich crumbled after barely 12 years, this same mother chose to extinguish the future she was supposed to embody. Letters Magda wrote to him from the bunker reveal heartbreaking contradictions. She urged him to remain strong, expressed pride in him, and wrote with an almost serene acceptance of her fate. But she never mentioned her plan to kill her 6 younger children. Harold had no warning. When he learned what had happened, he withdrew into silence. He never publicly discussed his mother's actions. He went on to build a successful industrial empire, dying in a plane crash in 1967. Some expressed sorrow, describing the children as tragic innocents caught in the machinery of a fanatical regime. Others treated the story with cold detachment, arguing that mourning the children of Joseph Goebbels risked overshadowing the millions killed through his propaganda, manipulation, and complicity. The world struggled to separate the children's innocence from the stain of their surname. She believed she was saving them from a world in which Hitler was gone, National Socialism had failed, and her own identity would be forever tainted. For Magda, death became an act of loyalty, a final offering to a leader she worshipped more than her own family. The irony was brutal. For years, the Nazi regime had exalted motherhood as sacred. Women were celebrated for producing racially pure children, praised as guardians of the future Reich. Over time, as more testimonies emerged from bunker survivors, a clearer picture formed of the atmosphere inside those final days. It was not simply fear that drove the adults. It was the collapse of an entire worldview. Many of the bunker's occupants had tethered their identity to the idea of the Reich. They believed, or had convinced themselves to believe, that Hitler represented Germany's destiny. When he died, that destiny vanished. The contradiction was devastating. It revealed that the propaganda had always been hollow. The mother of the Reich murdered the children of the Reich. The ideology that glorified life and purity ended in death and despair. And the children who had been displayed as symbols became victims sacrificed to preserve an illusion that no longer existed. Outside Germany, reactions were equally conflicted. Newspapers around the world reported the deaths with shock. Magda's final letters to friends and relatives revealed a strange mixture of despair and calm. She wrote of a world collapsing and insisted that her children must not endure the shame of living without National Socialism. She claimed that reincarnation would offer them a better life. To her, the future was not a place for her children. Only death could preserve their purity. Only death could keep them untainted by the reality she refused to accept. The tragedy deepened when historians examined how easily the children could have been saved. Multiple people in the bunker attempted to convince Magda to let them escape. Plans were drawn up to smuggle them out disguised as medical evacuees. Several of Hitler's remaining staff offered to carry them through the ruined streets, risking their own lives. Offers came from people who despised Joseph Goebbels, but who could not bear the thought of 6 innocent children dying because of adult fanaticism. Magda rejected every offer, one after another, never wavering. Joseph Goebbels remained fully complicit. In Hitler's final will, he wrote a chilling postscript stating that his wife and children supported the choice to die in the bunker. He added that the children would choose death if they were old enough to express themselves. It was a final manipulation, turning the children's silence into imagined consent, a propaganda technique applied to his own family. Today, the Goebbels children exist mostly in footnotes, their faces appearing occasionally in documentaries, their names rarely spoken. There are no public memorials, no plaques, no graves. Their bones were destroyed by the KGB in 1970, their ashes scattered into a river to prevent their burial site from becoming a place of neo-Nazi pilgrimage. In the end, even their physical remains were denied the dignity of rest. Yet their story endures not because of who their parents were, but because of what they represent. Innocence crushed by ideology, childhood stolen by fanatic devotion, and the irreversible damage caused when belief outweighs humanity.